and welcome to Spotlights. This is the podcast for the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. And this week, I'm really happy to welcome onto the show a friend and teacher, Sean Kelly. Sean, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Sam. Pleasure to be here.
So, for those who don't know you already, you're a professor of philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, California. And you're the author of a book, Coming Home, The Birth and Transformation of the Planetary Era. And you're a co-editor with myself and Adam Robert of the variety of integral ecologies, nature, culture, and knowledge in the planetary era. So there's a planetary theme to a lot of your work. And you have a new book that just came out on Valentine's Day, which is very poignant in a way. And it's Becoming Gaia on the Threshold of Planetary Initiation. So I want to chat with you about this book. And to start with, I want to hear what or who Gaia is to you, because there's a lot of Gaias floating around, right? We have like Lovelock and Margulis, and then people more recently like Bruno Latour throwing their hat in the ring. So it's never really clear just from hearing the word. And I know you have kind of a unique perspective on it.
Mm. Thank you, Sam. Yeah, what or who, I guess, is Gaia for me is how I'm, one way of looking at the question is going from a what to a who, which is not to deny the third person impersonal pronoun that is the dominant mode of engaging with Earth through Earth system sciences, let's say. So I have enormous respect for and fascination for Earth system sciences and that approach, and I draw from them. At the same time, I am inspired by people that you know very well, Thomas Berry, Brian Swim, and others who remind us of the possibility of relating to the Earth community, not as a collection of objects, but as a community of a communion of subjects. So I try in my own life and experience to relate to Gaia, my preferred name for Earth, generally now, as a communion of subjects who, at the same time, is a subject in I would say her own right. I know this is a contested and somewhat charged usage to use the gendered personal pronoun for Gaia, and I have my reasons for it, which I explain in the book. But this is a provisional use. I look upon the who, Gaia, as subject more in the way of I might call it a hyper subject. Timothy Morton speaks of climate as a hyper object. Well, I propose that we might think of Gaia as a hyper subject who is not only composed, as Bruno Latour might say, but composed by the various intersubjective enactions of the Earth community, but who has her own, dare I say, soul, and in our own time, emerging self-reflexivity in the mode of people like Thierry de Chardin and even Brian Swim, our friend and colleague, speak of in terms of the noosphere. So those are the traditions that I'm drawing from. That's the direction that I'm trying to go in. Maybe that's just good enough, maybe for a first pass.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, 'cause it just keeps getting deeper and deeper. Because ultimately, when you think of things like the ancient concept of the world soul, right, the anima mundi. So yeah, it's a rich way to think about it that includes Earth system sciences. But yeah, I appreciate the engagement with subjectivity or soul or personhood, which is it's difficult to tread there with gendering the Earth and things like that. But part of what I also appreciate is that you're situating our discovery of Gaia in this really large historical process, really an evolutionary process. And so one of the things you say, right, is that we're on the verge of a second axial age. So I wonder if you could say something about that, this transition from the first axial age to a second axial age. What does that mean?
Sure. So I adopt the term and idea of a second axial age from Ewart Cousins, who apparently adopted the term from Thomas Berry, but Ewart Cousins developed it more extensively in his book, Christ of the 21st Century, I believe. So the second axial age, the first axial age, as you know, but maybe our viewers don't know, is focused around the 8th to the 5th century BCE, and it was a period that saw the simultaneous emergence of all of the world's great the world religions, the great world religions and philosophical traditions and so on, which set the course for civilization for the next couple of millennia. So this was the first axial age. The second axial age, as Cousins first formulated it, in contrast to the predominantly transcendent and vertical orientation and upward vertical orientation of the first axial age toward a kind of transcendent universality, the second axial age was more concerned with enacting an integral kind of universality that was not only transcendent but rooted in the earth, and also horizontally engaged in terms of, let's say, interreligious dialogue, intercultural dialogue, in a way that the first axial age was not. And at the center of this kind of cross, according to Cousins, was indeed this living planet, the planet that within which we share our origins and destiny. So that was Ewart Cousins. I like to think that I'm, bringing something new to this discussion by not only contrasting the two axial ages, but seeing them both as, in fact, part of a single organic process that has stretched over these past 2,800 years, more or less, that I call the axial ion. And I see it as a single process because the second axial age, we can see how the issues that we're dealing with in the second axial age of the need for intercultural, interreligious dialogue, for coming to terms both with science and secularity, and ecological crisis and so on. We can see how all of these have their roots in the mutation of the first axial age. And the second axial age, we can see that we're being confronted with more explicitly with what seems to have been the goal all along. And this is a risk that I'm taking in this book, is embracing explicitly a kind of teleological, goal-directed narrative, or we can think of it as a lure. Something is wanting to happen. Something has been wanting to happen from the beginning. So it seems, if we look at this axial ion, as I call it, and use it to understand our current moment, and that something that's wanting to happen seems to be that Gaia, or process of a kind of awakening to herself as a planet, as an Earth community. This idea is not new. Again, it's sort of implicit in Teilhard de Chardin and Thomas Berry and Brian and Mary Evelyn Tucker bring in this idea in terms of their reading of the journey of the universe, or the universe story, that we're engaged in a process. And at this point of the process, the process itself is becoming self-aware. The evolutionary process is becoming self-conscious through the human. So I embrace that, and I use that to reconceptualize the organic relationship between the two axial ages as a single, we might say, teleologically guided process.
Right. Yeah, teleology is not fashionable in the academy right now. Although I think people are getting a little tired of some of the restrictions on that kind of thinking, and finding new openings for speculative thought, because we have to imagine. We have to think of these things on that scale, and if that means introducing teleology to help us think through it, then let's introduce a little teleology. How much could it hurt? It's not always hegemonic. It's not always domination. So I appreciate that about the book, and that it's also not a kind of triumphalist vision. In fact, The second axial age is, I mean, it's a mess, right? We're dealing with, global warming, mass extinction. You also bring up planetary apartheid, right? This very serious justice issues. And so, a big part of what you're talking about is that this emergence of a new axial age is also part of a planetary crisis that's effectively a collective near-death experience.
Mm.
And that makes sense if you're talking about initiation, talking about rites of passage, talking about near-death experience. So I wonder if you could bring that up. That seems like another, that would be a controversial thing to assert, that we're going
Mm.
through a collective near-death experience. What does that look like, and what are the implications of that?
Mm. Yeah, well, I guess a first comment would be, for me, it's just a factual comment that we are on the brink of losing the majority of complex life on the planet. So that mass extinction is literally coming nearer and nearer with every passing day. And people are feeling it. And as that's happening, of course, the awareness of climate chaos, climate emergency is accelerating. People are experiencing climate anxiety, climate grief, solastalgia, and so on. So there's a deep and wide sense that we are in danger of, that we already are losing all of the things that our species, and in fact, most of the mammalian species from the last 65 million years could take for granted in terms of a stable enough Earth environment for life to flourish. So we feel that, and that is what I mean just factually as a kind of near-death experience. But when we link that to what we know culturally about the role of near-death encounters in rites of initiation, rites of passage, uh, we can at least engage the possibility that this collective or planetary near-death experience might, it won't necessarily, but might serve a similar transformation on a planetary scale, a transformation of identity, which is exactly what the second axial age is about. So this would be the paradox in a way that uh, it might be that, at least retrospectively, we could say that uh, that the crisis that we're engaged in, accelerating in our times, might in some sense be necessary to catalyze the very transformation that needs to happen and that is wanting to happen. Um, it might be some form of consolation, but again, there's no guarantee that one will make the passage, and two, we don't know what will be on the other side. But at least we can imagine that the suffering, the anxiety, the dread could serve a deeper purpose.
Right. Yeah, that it doesn't have to be in vain.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's a very profound thought. It's not to justify any of that suffering, but it is to contextualize it so that it's put in some kind of a larger process,
Hmm.
and that process would be like a birth, but a birth on a collective level, and so that's us becoming Gaia.
Hmm.
Um, and so then, some people talk about like the era we're in, geologically as the Anthropocene,
Hmm.
and you're saying that's actually not quite it. And other people have proposed other terms, capitalocene, plantationocene. So why are you calling it the Gaia Anthropocene?
Hmm. Yeah, well, of course, I have no illusions that the term will be widely adopted, although I would be pleased if it were. Uh, yeah, I guess what I like about the the term Gaia Anthropocene is that while it's true, to my mind, that we have entered an age in which the human is a determining factor on a planetary scale for the fate of the rest of complex life and for other planetary systems, um, hence Anthropocene. Um, if the human is to survive and maybe even flourish in some form or another, rather than simply die off or degrade to a form of much lesser cultural diversity and a much impoverished life relative to the impoverished community of life in which it will have to live. it seems that the only way that the human could do that is if the human also redefines itself in a way that is more consistent with the deeper wisdom of the community of life in which the human is embedded, which is Gaia. So just as Gaia in our time has become anthropologized in a way, or anthropomorphized, uh, or Gaia has become humaned in the Anthropocene, so the human must be Gaiad, or must become Gaian. So I see the two processes as uh, simultaneous and complementary, and sort of necessary to each other in a way. They're both part of the same process. So this is the basic idea behind the idea of the Gaia Anthropocene.
Right, right. That that makes sense. And like cognitively, like I can go, oh yeah, I understand that. I think feeling into that is another story. That's a lot, right? Emotionally, and I think and then also acting as if that's true is another kind of level. So I wonder if we could explore both of those, the emotional side of this, right? Because I know one of the things you do aside from just academic work, you also teach Tai Chi, and you also do you're a facilitator of the group process work that reconnects, right? Developed by Joanna Macy.
Mm.
And so, in both cases, you have some practices for really dealing with very intense energies and the grief work and things like that. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. Near-death experience, what's that going to be like emotionally? And are there strategies for dealing with that?
Mm. Yeah, I am so grateful for yeah, for well, for the ability to move my body. It's such a gift. Uh, I don't dance as much as I would like, but I do have my Tai Chi practice and other Qigong practices and so on, which I try to do outside every day. And part of that practice, and there are many practices that one can imagine that would do this, is at some point is to try to feel into, and that can be through a visualization, it can be through paying attention to just somatic what's going on in the body, but trying to feel into the ways in which uh, uh, the body and its energies, the felt sense of being in a body, is already continuous with, connected to the larger body of this living earth. And that's a hard thing for me to do. I think it's a hard thing for a lot of us to do, especially if we're glued to a screen for most of the day or living in artificial environments. But it can be as simple as Joanna Macy reminds us of pausing for a few minutes and watching the breath. And even if it only lasts for a few seconds, getting to the point where we can have an experience of not only breathing, but being breathed by life. Since the breath, as you know, is not something that we uh, choose to do. We can choose to relate to it, and we can slow it and speed it up if we want. We can hold it for a while. But if we just breathe naturally and watch it, we can have an experience actually that we are actually being breathed by the life process, just as everyone, like you and I now, everyone who's alive, every animal is being breathed by life. Uh, so yeah, there are all kinds of practices, thankfully, that we can draw on. So many of them available, so many teachers, and that's one way. But it's hard. I like so many people, I imagine I'm preoccupied with what appears to be my own private little world, and with its own private fears of sickness, old age, and death, and collapse and violence, and all of which contracts me into what feels like a separate, vulnerable organism. And I guess intellectually, what I try to tell myself is that too is true. I am a relatively separate, vulnerable organism, as you are, and as my beloved is, and as we all are. So, and if I can remember that, then I start to get a sense, oh, yes, I am vulnerable and alone, as we all are vulnerable and alone together in this web of mutuality. So these are the kinds of things that I try to remind myself of, and experientially in the moment, and I link them the best way that I can to the more intellectual, philosophical, scientific narratives that I spend a lot of my time dealing with.
Right. Yeah, that's great. That's a great example with the breath. And so important to, yeah, you can't lose the philosophy and science, and then to integrate that with your emotional life and your spiritual practice, and all while going through this kind of planetary crisis. That's, you map that really well in the book, from what I've read so far. And one of the things I appreciate about this is, in one sense, it seems like you're going to start calling just for, planetary hospice work kind of stuff, and like, let's help the death happen as gently as possible. And there's that happening, but it's a near death experience. So there's also an ethical imperative. It's, not just about trying to die very gently and gracefully. It's also about how to really build, a more just and beautiful world.
Mm,
So it's not like fatalist. It's not pessimistic. It's not optimistic either, but it's
mm,
definitely not pessimistic. So I wonder if you could say a little bit about that, the ethics of this, like, the what is to be done.
mm. Yeah, well, particularly if I open myself up to the very real possibility that that we are living now at the end of a period of unparalleled biological diversity and cultural brilliance and horror, of course. But just speaking about the light side for a moment, and that we may relatively soon enter into a an irreversible decline. In other words, that maybe the near-death experience that the planet is involved in will lead to a kind of, maybe it is terminal. There is that very real possibility. I mean, I know that it will be terminal, even if all goes well. The most we would have is another few billion years until we get swallowed up by the sun and so on. So it's going to end sooner or later. But opening up to the real possibility that it might be a lot sooner than many people think, that raises some real issues. And so, what is the ground then of what can we appeal to for the grounds of ethical action, for passionate engagement in the world, if it's all for naught? Um, and as you know, the traditional world religions, and the ones particularly from the first Axial Age, might have appealed to an afterlife or to another realm, which could ground what we do here, um, and give us the courage and motivation to do the right thing while we're here, knowing what might follow afterwards. But a lot of people don't have that assurance anymore, and certainly the dominant secular scientific worldview doesn't buy into that. So one of the things I've been searching for is alternatives to either the dominant, we might say even literalistic sense of an afterlife of many of the axial religions, or a literal sense of something on the other side, which I don't deny, but given that that has become problematic for many people, if we don't have that, and if this secular world is looking at the possibility of some kind of real death, then is there a third way behind a kind of secular nihilism on the one hand and a more traditional transcendence on the other? So this is the question, and it's hard to sort of summarize here, but I have my own history of certain experiences and intuitions, which I put into relation with certain traditions, certain, we might say, mystical traditions. I appeal at a certain point to Master Dogen, a Zen teacher, and Jean Gebser, an integral philosopher, and others, to play with the possibility, or to uh, to bolster the intuition, as far as we can speak of it, that certain things are intrinsically good, regardless of how they might play out in some future date. And to tune in to that intrinsic goodness of, let's say, helping a neighbor, or of fighting for social justice, or of trying to save a species, even if we think that the odds are completely against us, or even if we think that, we'll have to start all over, or that it'll come to naught. That doing this kind of thing is intrinsically good in itself, um, uh, and has a kind of infinite value in itself. So this is what I try to play with in the ethical part of the last chapter, but it's hard for me to summarize at this point.
Yeah, I would think not easy to give a quick kind of elevator pitch for an alternative to the ancient idea of a heaven or an afterlife and the modern kind of secular idea. You're like, no, I have a 10-second way I can really summarize what the purpose of human life is, and not easy. I should say though, the book isn't like some 800-page tome. It's you do a really good job of putting these very complex things into a pretty small space.
Oh, thank you.
So I appreciate that, and just the sense that you that hopelessness doesn't mean that you're still not doing good things, right? And that there's something more than just the hopeful or hopeless, or the optimism and pessimism. You're finding that kind of middle ground,
Mm,
which I really appreciate. I think a lot of people in environmental work have kind of gotten hoped out. There's been so much emphasis on hope that some of these other virtues aren't getting that much attention.
mm,
So it reminds me of the line, I think, from Martin Luther King, that if the world were ending tomorrow and I had like a apple sapling, in my hand, I would still plant it,
mm,
right? Because it's intrinsically good. I think that might come from the Quran initially, that it's like a palm frond. Would you plant it? It's like, yeah, even if it was the end of the world, you still plant it, not because of any consequences, but because it's intrinsically good.
mm.
Um, so I appreciate that a lot. I think that's like it helps people have more resolve or courage to face things, even when they're just terrible.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, for reminding me of that those lines. Yeah, but I just want to say that I know saying that something is intrinsically good could sound rather dry, and I mean, if I'm just claiming that certain things are intrinsically good, so you should do it, there could be a kind of like moral uh, dryness and dogmatism there. But I'm actually coming from a an intuition or an experience related to time, to a time sense. Um, and just to put it out there, baldly, without any support whatsoever, the idea, actually, I could relate it philosophically. I mean, you're familiar with Nietzsche's idea of the eternal recurrence, that everything that we've experienced an infinite number of times before, and will experience an infinite number of times in the future. I'm not talking about an eternal recurrence, but rather uh, the idea that every action, every moment, uh, even as it passes, is somehow um, eternally happening, right? This is where the appeal to a kind of certain mystical tradition of the eternal present comes in. So even though I'm not appealing to the first axial age religious sensibility of transcendence, I am drawing from the certain strands of the mystical and esoteric traditions that come out of that first axial tradition, which have preserved the idea corresponding to an experience of time as not only something that immediately passes into nothingness, but as a kind of eternally occurring space. And if we can have it, that kind of experience, or even think of it, then we say, oh, so now I can see how planting the sapling, even though the world ends tomorrow, the planting itself is something that goes on eternally. And or the first kiss with your lover, it's gone right away. But that first kissing is something that is happening eternally, right? So this is the experiential, we might say, mystical ground of an ethics for the end times, as far as I'm concerned. And it's not just a bare humanistic, heroic, do the right thing because it's intrinsically good, which I admire, but I'm just not capable of being sustained by that. I need something more.
Right. Yeah. And that's such a theme for the whole field of religion and ecology, right? Is we need this deeper spiritual ground, and that
Mm.
humanistic ethics and things like that have some pretty serious limitations. And yeah, I don't know, I can't imagine really a better note to end on than the eternal first kiss. So we better leave it there.
uh,
And for people to really understand how to have that eternal first kiss, they're gonna
mm.
have to buy the
Thank you,
book.
Sam. Such a pleasure speaking with you as always.
Yeah, always a pleasure. And thanks for making time for our little show here.
Mm.
And thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll be back next week with some more discussions for you. And in the meantime, take care and be well.